Have you ever noticed that people today have become terrified of silence? Not the silence of a quiet room, but the silence within themselves. They fill every void, every second, every heartbeat with noise, distraction, entertainment, anything to avoid confronting what lives inside them when no one is watching. And here's the uncomfortable truth. They're not just avoiding boredom, they're fleeing from themselves. Because in the silence, there's no filter, no performance, no curated version of who they pretend to be. There's only the raw, unedited truth. And most people cannot handle that truth. They would rather drown in noise than face 2 minutes alone with their own mind. But you know what's fascinating? The most powerful people you've ever encountered, the ones who seem untouchable, unshakable, the ones who command respect without demanding it, they all have one thing in common. They're comfortable in their own silence. They don't need constant validation. They don't need endless connection. They don't need the world to tell them they exist, because they've built something that most people will never understand. An internal fortress so strong that nothing external can breach it. And that fortress wasn't built in comfort. It was built in isolation, in solitude, in the brutal confrontation with themselves that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Let me tell you something they don't want you to know. Your need for constant connection is not natural. It's programmed. It's a cage disguised as community. Every time you reach for your phone, the second you feel uncomfortable, every time you text someone just to feel seen, every time you scroll through feeds to confirm you're not alone, you're not connecting, you're escaping. And every escape makes you weaker, because you're not building resilience, you're building dependency. And dependency, my friend, is the enemy of freedom. The world doesn't fear the strong, it fears the self-sufficient. Because a person who needs nothing cannot be controlled, cannot be bought, cannot be manipulated. And that is terrifying to a system built on making you believe you're incomplete without something external. So if you've ever felt different, if you've ever preferred your own company to the chaos of crowds, if you've ever been called cold, distant, antisocial, this is for you. Because what they call isolation is actually liberation. And what they call loneliness is actually power. Once you understand this, you'll never see yourself the same way again, because being alone isn't your weakness, it's your weapon, and they're terrified you'll figure that out. Here's the trap most people fall into. They confuse being alone with being lonely. And those two things are worlds apart. Being lonely is emotional starvation. It's the feeling that something is missing, that you're incomplete, that without others you're somehow less. But being alone, that's intentional, that's strategic, that's a conscious choice. To remove yourself from the noise so you can hear your own voice. And here's the twist. Lonely people are never really alone. They're surrounded by people, yet they feel empty inside. Because connection without depth is just distraction. It's background noise pretending to be presence. You can be in a room full of people and feel completely isolated, but you can be completely alone and feel whole. The difference? One is running from themselves. The other has faced themselves and won. Let's go deeper. Think about the last time you were truly alone. No phone, no music, no distractions, just you and your thoughts. How long did it take before you felt uncomfortable? Before you reached for something to fill the void? That discomfort, that restlessness, that's not boredom. That's your mind confronting everything you've been avoiding, every insecurity you've buried, every fear you've suppressed, every part of yourself you don't want to acknowledge. And instead of sitting with it, instead of processing it, you escape. You text someone, you scroll, you consume, you do anything to avoid that mirror. And every time you do that, you lose a little more of yourself. But here's what the truly powerful understand. That discomfort is not the enemy, it's the teacher. Because when you can sit in silence without running, when you can face yourself without flinching, when you can be alone without feeling like you're missing something, you've unlocked a level of strength most people will never Experience. You've become immune to loneliness, and once you're immune to loneliness, you're immune to manipulation. Because if you don't need people, they can't leverage your need against you. If you don't fear being alone, you can't be threatened with abandonment. If your peace doesn't depend on external validation, no one can take it from you. This is what they don't teach you. The person who can walk away from anything, from anyone, without flinching, is the most dangerous person in the room. Not because they're cruel, but because they're free. And freedom is the one thing this world cannot tolerate, because a free person doesn't follow the script, doesn't chase approval, doesn't play the game. They write their own rules, and that makes them unpredictable. Unpredictable people cannot be controlled, and that's why the world will try everything to convince you that you need to stay connected, stay plugged in, stay dependent. Now let's talk about what happens when you refuse to play that game, when you choose solitude over noise, when you prioritize your internal world over external validation. At first, people will judge you. They'll call you weird, antisocial, cold. They'll say you're avoiding life, that you're missing out. And here's the irony. The people saying that are the ones who can't stand to be alone with themselves for 5 minutes. They're projecting their fear onto you, because your comfort in solitude reminds them of their discomfort in their own skin. Your independence highlights their dependency, and that makes them uneasy. So they attack, they ridicule, they try to pull you back into the noise, not because they care about you, but because your freedom exposes their chains. But if you hold firm, if you refuse to break, something shifts, the attacks stop, the judgment fades, and what replaces it? Respect, curiosity, even fear, because now they see you differently. You're not avoiding people, you're selective, you're not antisocial, you're sovereign. And there's a power in that selectivity that commands attention without demanding it, because when you don't need anyone, people start to need you. When you're not chasing connection, connection starts chasing you. And that's the paradox. The less you need, the more you attract. The more comfortable you are alone, the more people want to be around you. Not because you've changed, but because your energy has. You're no longer desperate. You're no longer needy. You're complete. And completeness is magnetic. Here's where it gets even more interesting. Let's talk about the internal battle. Because choosing solitude isn't just about removing external noise. It's about confronting internal chaos. And that chaos is loud. It's the voice that tells you you're not enough. The voice that replays every mistake, every rejection, every moment of shame. That voice doesn't get quieter when you're alone. It gets louder. And this is where most people break. They can't handle the volume of their own thoughts, so they run back to distraction, back to noise, back to anything that drowns out that voice. But here's the truth. That voice isn't your enemy. It's your ego. It's the part of you that's been conditioned to seek external validation. And as long as you keep feeding it with distractions, it will never shut up. But when you starve it, when you refuse to engage, when you sit in that discomfort and let it burn, something incredible happens. The voice weakens, it loses power, and in its place, something else emerges. Clarity, calm, confidence. Not the fake confidence that comes from likes and compliments, real confidence, the kind that doesn't need to be announced, the kind that just is. And that confidence is unshakable, because it's not built on external approval. It's built on internal mastery. Now, let's destroy another illusion. The idea that you need people to be happy. Let me be brutally honest. You don't need people to be happy. You need purpose. You need meaning. You need a reason to exist that transcends the opinions of others. And most people don't have that. They've outsourced their happiness to relationships, to social circles, to being liked. And the moment those things disappear, they collapse. Because they've built their identity on sand, and sand shifts, but the person who's built their identity on purpose, on discipline, on internal sovereignty, They stand, no matter what storms come, because their foundation is solid. It's not dependent on anyone or anything external. It's rooted in who they are, not who others think they are. Think about it. How many people do you know who can't function without constant social interaction? Who spiral when they're alone for too long? Who need constant reassurance that they matter? That's not connection, that's addiction. And like any addiction, it makes you weak. It makes you desperate. It makes you controllable. But the person who can sit in solitude for days, weeks, months, and emerge stronger, that's not isolation. That's training. That's the forging of a mind so powerful that it doesn't need external fuel to function. It generates its own energy, its own purpose, its own meaning, and that is terrifying to a world that profits from your dependency. Here's a question that will make you uncomfortable. If tomorrow everyone disappeared, if you had no one to talk to, no one to validate you, no one to see you, would you still know who you are? Would you still feel like you matter? If the answer is no, then you're not living, you're performing. And performances require an audience. But life doesn't. Life happens whether anyone's watching or not. And the sooner you understand that, the sooner you break free from the invisible chains that keep you begging for attention. Let's talk about the paradox of modern connection. We've never been more connected and yet more isolated. We have thousands of followers, but no real friends. We have endless conversations, but no real communication. We're constantly surrounded by people, yet constantly alone. Why? Because connection without depth is an illusion. It's noise pretending to be presence. And most people live in that illusion their entire lives. They mistake quantity for quality. They confuse attention for affection. They think that because people like their posts, they're liked. But likes aren't love. Comments aren't companionship. And followers aren't friends. It's all surface, all performance, all hollow. And the moment you step away from that performance, the moment you choose solitude over shallow connection, you see it for what it is: a distraction, a drug, a cage. But here's the beautiful part. When you break free from that cage, when you choose depth over breadth, when you prioritize your internal world over external validation, everything changes. You stop wasting energy on people who don't matter. You stop pretending to be interested in conversations that bore you. You stop performing for an audience that doesn't even remember your name. And in that space, you reclaim your energy, your focus, your time. And those three things, they're the most valuable resources you have. More valuable than money, more valuable than status. Because energy, focus, and time are what build empires, and you've been giving them away for free to people who don't deserve them. Now let's talk about the people who will try to pull you back, because they will. The moment you start choosing solitude, the moment you start prioritizing yourself, people will notice, and they won't like it. They'll accuse you of changing, of being distant, of not caring. And here's the truth. They're right. You have changed. You are distant. You don't care about the things you used to. But not because you've become cold, because you've become conscious. You've woken up, and waking up means seeing things as they are, not as you were told they should be. And what you see is that most relationships are transactional. Most friendships are conditional. Most connections are shallow, and once you see that, you can't unsee it. So you pull back. You become selective. You guard your energy. And that threatens people, because your evolution exposes their stagnation, your independence highlights their dependency, your peace reveals their chaos, and they hate you for it, not because you've wronged them, but because your existence reminds them of everything they're too afraid to become. Let me share a secret that took me years to understand. The people who judge you for being alone are the same people who can't stand being alone themselves. They're projecting, they're telling you what they fear. And if you let their fear dictate your choices, you'll stay trapped in a life that doesn't serve you. But if you ignore them, If you trust your own path, if you embrace the solitude that terrifies them, you'll discover something most people never will. You don't need anyone to complete you. You're already whole. And that wholeness is your greatest strength. Here's where the power really comes in. When you're comfortable being alone, you stop tolerating things that diminish you. You stop accepting disrespect because you're not afraid of being left. You stop clinging to toxic relationships because you're not afraid of being alone. You stop settling because you know your own company is better than bad company. And that shift in energy changes everything. You become selective. You set standards. You walk away from anything that doesn't align with your peace. And the people who stay, they're not there because you need them. They're there because they add value. And that's the only kind of connection worth having. Now let's talk about what you gain when you master solitude. First, you gain clarity, because in the silence, there's no noise to distort your thinking, no opinions to sway you, no distractions to cloud your judgment. You see things as they are. You see yourself as you are. And that clarity is power, because you can't change what you can't see. And most people never see themselves clearly because they're too busy performing for others. Second, you gain focus, because when you're not constantly connected, when you're not constantly consuming, you can actually create. You can think deeply, you can work without interruption, you can build something meaningful instead of just reacting to the noise. And in a world where everyone's distracted, the person who can focus is unstoppable. Third, you gain control, not control over others, control over yourself, your emotions, your reactions, your energy, because when you're alone, there's no one to blame, no one to depend on, no one to save you. It's just you. And that forces you to take responsibility, to own your life, to become the architect of your own existence. And that ownership is freedom. Fourth, you gain resilience. Because when you've sat alone with your darkest thoughts and didn't break, when you've faced your fears without running, when you've rebuilt yourself in silence, you become unbreakable, not invincible, but unshakable. Because you know that no matter what happens externally, you'll be okay. Because you've been okay before, alone. And that knowledge is armor. Fifth, you gain presence, real presence, not the performative kind, the kind where you're fully here, fully engaged, fully alive, because you're not constantly checking your phone, not constantly worrying about what others think, not constantly seeking validation. You're just present, and presence is rare, and rarity is power. Let me tell you something that might sting. Most people will never experience this level of freedom, because they're too afraid to be alone. They'll spend their entire lives chasing connection, seeking approval, performing for an audience that doesn't care, and they'll die never knowing who they really were, because they never gave themselves the space to find out. They never had the courage to face themselves. They never chose solitude over comfort, and that's tragic, because the greatest relationship you'll ever have is with yourself. And if you can't be alone with yourself, how can you expect anyone else to want to be with you? Here's the final truth, the brutal one, the one that separates those who get it from those who never will. You came into this world alone, and you'll leave it alone. Everything in between, every relationship, every connection, every moment of companionship is temporary. But you're with yourself from birth to death. So why are you spending your entire life running from the one person you can never escape? Why are you so terrified of your own company? Why are you treating solitude like a disease when it's actually the cure? The answer is simple. Because you've been conditioned to believe that being alone is failure. That if you're not constantly surrounded by people, something's wrong with you. That solitude is loneliness. And loneliness is weakness. But that's a lie. A lie designed to keep you dependent, to keep you consuming, to keep you controllable. Because a person who's comfortable alone doesn't need to buy things to fill the void, doesn't need to perform for validation, doesn't need to follow the script. And that makes them dangerous to a system that profits from your insecurity. So here's what you need to do. Stop running. Stop filling every moment with noise. Stop seeking external validation. Start sitting in silence. Start confronting your thoughts. Start building that internal fortress. Not because you hate people, but because you value yourself enough to know you don't need them to survive. You can thrive alone. And when you thrive alone, you attract people who add to your life instead of draining from it. You build relationships based on choice, not need. And that changes everything. This isn't about becoming a hermit. It's about becoming sovereign. It's about owning your energy, your time, your peace. It's about refusing to let the world dictate how you should live. It's about choosing depth over distraction, purpose over performance, freedom over fear. And yes, it's lonely at first, because you're breaking patterns, cutting ties, walking away from everything familiar. But that loneliness is temporary. What comes after, that's permanent, that's power, that's peace. So if you've made it this far, if you've felt every word, if something inside you is screaming that this is the truth you've been avoiding, then you're ready to stop running, ready to face yourself, ready to embrace the solitude that terrifies everyone else. And when you do, when you finally sit alone without fear, without distraction, without need, you'll discover something the world tried to hide from you. You're not incomplete, you're not broken, you're not missing anything, you're whole. You've always been whole. You just needed the silence to hear it. Now I want you to do something. Not for me, for you. If this resonated, if you felt this in your core, leave a comment with this phrase, "I am my own fortress." That's not just a comment. That's a declaration, a reminder, a commitment to yourself that you're done running, that you're ready to stand alone, that you're ready to become untouchable. And if you want more of this, if you're ready to keep stripping away the lies and rebuilding yourself from the ground up, subscribe, because this isn't motivation, this isn't self-help, this is a dismantling, a complete deconstruction of everything you were taught to believe. And if you're still here, you're one of the few who can handle it, one of the few who's ready to become truly free. I'll see you in the next one, or I won't. That's up to you. But if you come back, don't come back the same. Come back stronger, come back clearer, come back free. Because that's what this is about, not being liked, being liberated. And now, I'll leave you with this silence. Let it echo, let it settle. Let it remind you that you don't need anyone's voice to feel whole. You already are, you always have been. You just forgot. Now go remember,